Continuing our reading in Abraham Hannibal and the Raiders of the Sands by Francis Summers Cox. This episode is chapter 10, African Zion. 41 days the journey took. Abraham kept count. Every night when he curled up inside his cloak to sleep, whether in a village hut or in the compound of a rich local lord, or in a rough shelter of branches against the mountain cold, or most often simply under the stars, he cut a mark in his stick. He had his own white mule, Butterfly, who had a sweet face and a loving nature, but got her name because she had a mind that flitted madly from one thing to another. At first it was fun riding her, being up so high, but he soon took to walking most of the time, while she went ahead, so that he could chat to the donkey drivers. His father was riding his favorite stallion, Thunder. Abraham had ridden Thunder once. It had been 2 whole dry seasons ago. 3 of his half-brothers had dared him to, and he'd done it. They'd been herding the cattle one hot noontide, and they'd found the slave who was looking after their father's horses fast asleep. Abraham cut the rope hobbling Thunder's front legs himself, and his brothers had lifted him up. He could never have mounted the great, shiny ebony cliff by himself. He had been too small to grip Thunder's flanks with his knees, so he had twisted his hands into the stallion's mane, wrapped his legs around his neck, and then whispered into his ear, "Go, Thunder, go! Go like the wind!" And Thunder had gone, galloping madly, bucking and leaping through the thorn scrub, over the dry stream beds, round the great strands of umbrella cactus, further and further toward the wild lands, until at last he had stumbled over a stone and pitched the boy onto the dark, hard earth. It was growing dark by the time Abraham limped home. Thunder had made his way back hours before. Fares beat him, of course, but not nearly as hard as he might have done, and Abraham thought he could see a glint of pride in his father's eyes as he shouted at him, "What business has a boy of your age riding in the Lord's horses? Besides," it had been worth it, for the swish of the wind on his skin and the rushing of the stone ground below Thunder's hooves. But Abraham was 2 whole years older now, and he was leaving his home and his brothers behind. There were steep and chilly mountains to cross soon after leaving home, then the Merib River. It was far wider than he knew it at home, but not too deep, and even silly Butterfly had to be, and the loaded donkeys waded across without too much trouble. Then there was a long, long plain where mountains, sharp as knife blades, thin as sheets of parchment, jabbed up sheer into the sky and filled his dreams at night. Then they arrived at the town of Aksum, which looked quite ordinary at first, a bit like Debarwa, but not as big or as busy, but where Abraham's beloved stories of the kings came alive. First of all, they went to pray in a church quite different from every church Abraham had ever seen, for the churches he knew were all round, and this one was long with 4 corners. "You are doing an act that God will remember on Judgment Day, Abraham, by praying in the church of Our Lady of Zion," said Fares, the Lord of the Sea, as they kissed the doorpost of the church and went to stand in front of the Holy of Holies. "Why is that?" "Because the tablets of the law that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai and the Ark of the Covenant that he built to hold them are here in this church, there, right in front of us." Abraham looked at the Holy of Holies, its wooden doors closed tight, and its outside walls covered with paintings like bigger versions of the pictures in Abba Mikhail's Stories of the Kings, and tried to remember what was inside. "Do you remember the story, little monk?" "You mean how the Emperor Menelik took the Holy Ark of the Covenant from the temple in his father Solomon in Jerusalem and brought it to his mother's land?" "Good boy. This is the land of Sheba, here around Aksum. This is Queen Makeda's country. Outside are the great stones that the grandsons of Menelik built. So when they had prayed, they went out to marvel at the gigantic solid stone obelisks that were old when Jesus was born. So people said. One of them had long since fallen and smashed, but another towered over the huge old sycamore tree behind, taller by far than any building Abraham had ever seen. And that's the end of chapter 10.